Last week, we talked about how certain products that have been recently discontinued by the Aquarium Co-op might be exposing a potential larger problem within the aquarium industry as a whole. This week, I want to follow up on that and talk a little more broadly about a bigger problem that might be at stake, and that's us, hobbyists. Let's dive in and explain. Hello everyone, this is Bentley. Today, we're going to do a follow-up to last week's video where we talked about some of the products that Aquarium Co-op has sourced recently that needed to be discontinued due to failure rates, and how there's actually some bigger problems in the aquarium industry. And the Aquarium Co-op might have exposed those problems, except that because they're so transparent about things, they might be doing it in a much better way. Well, I want to follow up on that, and I wanted to give us an idea of where some of these problems occur. And basically what I want to say is, previously, we hobbyists, and this goes back to like your 50s, 60s, 70s, even part of the 80s, where quality was number one when it came to the aquarium products we purchased. We would look at things like hang-on-the-back filters or air pumps, heaters, and things like that, and we would specifically go for the ones that lasted us the longest. Eventually, companies realized they weren't making enough money off of those things, so they started changing the way they did things in order to increase profits. But the real question is the significant drop-off in product quality the fault of greedy corporations, or is it us? And let me explain why I say, is it us? Because we're going to look at both sides of this argument. As a hobbyist, as someone who purchases things, we're kind of used to that concept of speak with your wallet. But if we continuously chase the cheapest possible thing, we're looking for the best deal, well, we're just incentivizing companies to spiral further and further into the cheapest production items instead of a more high-quality, long-lasting item. And for those of us who are in North America, for my European friends, or maybe are in Japan and even parts of Australia where this is a little different, you'll probably think to yourselves, man, it's crazy how cheap you Americans or you Canadians or whatever are in this hobby. It is oddly more common in Europe, you think UK, Germany, where those really nice aquascape tanks that can cost $2,000 or $3,000 are more normal. Buying a very high quality light, a high quality filter, instead of the cheapest glass tank we can get, looking at a very nice rimless setup is far more prevalent and common. It doesn't mean it's the only thing that exists. However, it just tends to be a little bit more common to invest in high quality parts. This is where you see companies like Eheim being extremely popular, where many of their canister filters, you buy them once, and you might occasionally have to replace a small part here and there, but they're very available. You can get every part known to man, but for the most part, those like classic Eheim filters will last you for a very long time, 10, 15, maybe even 20 years. Some of the old heaters that were out there in the 80s, I have one, I should have brought it in as a prop, but one of those like ugly green heaters, it's like this long for 100 watts, right? They're just like ridiculously huge, but the coils are nowhere near as tightly wound. They go all the way up the piece. It still works to this day. I have a heater that is over 20 years old. It's actually probably from like the mid-80s, so it's getting close to 40 years old, and it still works like a charm. The only way that in theory it's going to go out on me, other than just it's been too many years, is if I were to accidentally impact it and break it. We don't see that in modern day heaters. But is that our fault or is it corporate greed? So let's talk about the corporate greed side. A majority of our products are manufactured in China. Many retailers are incentivized to chase the cheapest product for a certain level of user rigor, right? And let me give you some examples. Not to bash specifically on Aquarium Co-op, this just happens to be the one I have here, but I'm going to open this brand new sponge filter, right? So this is one of their large sponge filters. With the tube and everything that comes with it, we pay an amount for these, right? I think they're like $16 in the co-op. I can look up exact pricing. That's not the part that matters, okay? And you could use a more fine sponge filter. You could look at like the Hydro 5 that is out there, etc., etc. Let's talk about how much this costs. So I reached out to a good friend of mine who has a lot of contacts in Shenzhen, which is where many of our aquarium products are manufactured. He has direct contacts to some of the very large manufacturing companies over there. I'm going to leave him anonymous, but on record. He gave me these prices and information on record. So we looked up and we did some work. One thing that's worth noting is almost every Chinese-made product out there has what's called an XY code. Sponge filters are probably the most notorious in that there's a bunch of different XY codes that determine size, like height, diameter of the sponge, etc., and they include the unit here, right? A sponge filter of equivalent size to this co-op one in my hand. Not this exact filter, although yes, we did look up what this exact filter costs out of China. And for the prices I'm going to give you are what are referred to as unnegotiated prices. What this means is they have some minimum order allotments and they have a standardized price that is available through retailers like Alibaba, as an example, very often. An unnegotiated large sponge filter this size, 80 cents. That's all this costs. Now to get your packaging, your fancy packaging like this, that, roughly speaking, adds about as much as the initial part. So now we're at $1.60. And you would then, there's a general rule, this is unfreighted, by the way, so that does not include freight to get it to your house, to your building, your facility, or whatever, right? To get it freighted, typically you, again, about double the cost. But you only double this cost. So in the end, what you're talking about is about 3 times the total cost. If you want very fancy packaging, maybe a small customization, like a different color plastic. Maybe you want gray, green, black, whatever. Black is the standard. So you're looking at $2.40. Minimum order 20. But if you start ordering, say, 1,000 units, that price goes down. You order 10,000 units, that price goes down. I was talking with my friend for about 3 hours to do research on this and looking at some price lists and doing our own research. And basically what we found is that to get an equivalent filter to this, not this specific filter, but in any coarse or fine sponge you want, there's lots of different options, you are looking at 80 cents a unit, unnegotiated. That means you can just buy them outright, but if you were going to do, say, 20, 30, 40,000 units, an entire several containers worth, you could negotiate that price down significantly more to a point of where, assuming you're not doing anything fancy like crazy grooves or some really different, like this is a very standardized fitting up here since like the 80s. As long as you're not doing any major changes like that, you're using a very common mold that China has and can manufacture at speed. And maybe the small changes like a slightly different level of density in your foam here. Maybe you don't want something quite as coarse as this. And maybe instead of green, you want to have a nice gray plastic, right? Unnegotiated. As long as you order at least 20, these are 80 cents. But if you were to negotiate something where it was like multiple containers worth, it is reasonable that you could get these down to somewhere closer to 60 or maybe even 50 cents a piece. Then you add on packaging and freight, and let us just say that we're going to be over conservative and that this sponge filter shipped to me, ready to go in my own custom packaging and everything, is less than $3. Less than $3. Now, we didn't just target this. Sponge filter is very common. There's tons of them. If you really wanted a great example, you would actually want to look up, and you can find some of these on Amazon, XY380. That is a really, if you've seen sponge filters, the second you look at the picture of it anywhere, you will recognize that sponge filter immediately. That is like the most common manufactured out the kit Chinese sponge filter you can get. And if you get it exactly like that, the XY380, no changes whatsoever, you can easily get those down to something like 40 cents a piece if you order in enough quantity. That's negotiated. Unnegotiated, they're still about that 80 cents a piece. Very, very cheap. Now, here's our next one, 100-watt heater. Now, this is the discontinued one, but we target it because there is a version of this on Amazon. It's like the AQQL or something like that. It doesn't have as long as a cord. There's a few small changes that Co-op made, but still, right? These like square designed heaters that have the little LCD readout and all that wonderful stuff, right? The difference is this model, the one that is corded and does not have any like wireless controllers or remotes or anything like that, the discontinued one, no longer can find pricing on that. But we did find an upgraded version. It is the same diameters and everything. It's a slightly upgraded model, but it has a little wireless controller to control all the things instead of the inline cable controller. Assuming with all of those extra fancy features and you order at least 500 units, that piece of hardware, unnegotiated, would cost you just under $6 per unit. That would include basic packaging. Now, if you want a custom packaging, it's going to cost you a little more. Not quite as much as, say, double. But basically, a good rule is to say roughly double that cost, and that will include all of your custom packaging. If you're putting a label that says your name, Jim Bob's Aquarium, whatever, Bentley's Aquarium, whatever, on the product itself, and freighted to you. Basically about $10 each. These are the cost of things that you can get out of China. Let's go to another one, a non-Aquarium Co-op product, because I don't want to just bash on the Aquarium Co-op, right? These are just easy examples of things that we know and recognize. I'm going to put this up there. This Bio Wheel hang-on-the-back filter. You've probably seen these from the company most recently. They look nice. They got a little cartridge bays in them. They got a little skimmer attachment. They got a little miniature bio wheel, kind of like a faux marine land thing going on. You will be surprised at the cost of this thing. Now, this one we wanted to use specifically, and I'll show you this too when I put it up. This is the direct Alibaba page showing this filter for sale. And as long as you order 24 units, at least 24, they're $9 a piece for this hang-on back filter. Done in a box, everything. Now, it's not custom packaging. It's bare bones basic packaging. But that's something that, like, Haiger does. Very simple packaging, right? Now, you can notice these are all unnegotiated prices. Again, but if you increase that order quantity, as long as you're ordering more than 2,000 of them, now they're $7.50 a piece. Which means that we have reduced the price of this item in quantity by just over 16%. Now imagine if you're negotiating with this company because you're going to order 50,000 units. Starting to understand? Now, what's the goal here? The goal here isn't to go, look at how cheap these things are, you're getting ripped off. That's not the case. Because these products don't have warranties. The companies that are bringing them in and selling them, if they're offering a warranty, they're offering it out of their own stock. But because of these price points, you can see where planned obsolescence or higher failure rates, higher than that 5% that the co-op was doing, you could probably have something like 10 or 15% and still know that you're going to profit immensely off of your order because they cost so little, they leave so much room for profit for the companies. But is that corporate greed? I'm going to argue it both is and isn't. There are plenty of companies out there, and I'll give you an example of one that had some notoriety for some problems, but if you really understood them, knew what was really going on. Cobalt had this amazing heater that at one point they designed, and they sent the design to be manufactured in China. It was their patented design. And the Chinese manufacturer basically said, like, we have this perfectly fine working heater here. Why don't you do this? It'll cost you way less money. And they said, no. And that heater is a heater that I think retailed at like $60 or something like that. I mean, it's a very expensive heater. But they were kind of, for a while, notorious as like the best heater on the market. And then Cobalt launched a secondary line that looked kind of similar, that was significantly more economically friendly. And those failed a lot. A lot. And people started conflating the failures of this new, cheaper line with the very expensive line that very rarely failed. They had a much more, how should I put this, robust set of design and engineering and testing to where that product effectively never fails. You know, it would have like 1 or 2 in a million that would fail on you. early on, and the rest of them would last for years and years and years and were very rock solid. But the cheaper line failed at a significantly higher rate to the point of where I believe it might have been pulled off the market, and it got conflated and ruined the reputation of the much better, higher quality product, because people were so pissed at, like, what do you mean that Cobalt heater's failing? Doesn't that thing like $60? And it was like, no, you're talking about the one that cost you $15. But it was very easy for consumers to make mistakes and blame the other one. So that's where part of the fault actually lies on us, because we'll look at a $60 heater and we'll be like, $60 for a freaking 100-watt heater? Are you kidding me? Why would I do that when I can buy this one that's remote controlled and has a little LCD readout that shows me my temperature and little LED to indicate when it's actively on heating and all these nice features, and it's got this nice sleek case around it. It only costs $20. Why am I going to spend $60 on this thing? Because there's a difference in product quality, but we just look at the price very frequently. So we kind of incentivize the corporations that are making things or contracting to bring things in, or just even the small companies that are just bringing in Chinese goods without any changes whatsoever. We incentivize them to find the cheapest, most competitive thing, because they've got to fight with every other person on Amazon or every other company out there that's building that next cheap item that we end up chasing in the hobby. Now, can you get a cheap heater and a cheap sponge filter, a cheap air pump, etc., and put together an aquarium? Yes. But how long is that going to last you? How long is it going to be effective? How reliable is that heater going to be? Or do you need a temperature controller no matter what? Get a temperature controller. But seriously, I mean, this is where I want us and you, the viewer. I want you, right? I'm talking to you, right? You, right? I want you to think about these things and make the decision for yourself. Is it purely corporations are at fault? Or is it us entirely that are at fault? Or is it a combination of the two? I've shown you a number of products, and I'm not trying to directly bag on some of these companies, but finding equivalent products, equivalent in some quotation marks, to get an understanding. It doesn't mean it is exactly this one, right? Like the Aquarium Co-op heater has some changes to it compared to the AQQ, whatever the heck it is that's on Amazon. There are changes between the two. They might be small for some people, but they are slightly different, so those incur different costs. But I want us to understand, like, a relatively new style 100-watt heater that is something similar to what we're used to seeing. A basic sponge filter. Everybody knows a basic large sponge filter, right? That XY380. That's our buddy. A hang-on-the-back filter that is relatively new. It's not necessarily one of the big companies been around forever, but you can easily find them on Amazon. And see just how inexpensive it costs companies to bring these in from Chinese manufacturers. And understand that there's all this room to where if the failure rates are higher, that's okay. Because they could, in theory, assume that every customer is going to buy is 2 units. One that they buy and one just in case warranty happens. And they still have plenty of room to make profit. I know this one's a little rambly, a little off the rails, but I hope you've enjoyed this. If you did, if maybe you want to look, you've got a different idea, something else I should dive a little deeper in when it comes to product quality. These are things that matter to me, right? I love this kind of stuff. Let me know in the comments down below. Did you learn something new? Are you now, like, just drastically surprised at how cheap you can buy things when it comes to Chinese manufacture? You just got to figure out how to get it freighted to you? Let me know in the comments down below. I love hearing from you guys on topics like this. If you're new to this channel, maybe it's your first time seeing something like this, consider watching last week's video, because I think it's also really good, and I think it's a good discussion to also make your own mind up on whether or not that level of transparency that Aquarium Co-op has given us is a really good thing, or whether it's kind of exposing that there's actually a wider issue and they're just the first one that's been forced to talk about it. Love to hear in the comments down below. Consider subscribing, maybe ring the notification bell just so you can see every video as they come out. As always, my friends, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome.